Okay, so I just want to give a quick disclaimer. So I'm not legally qualified. I do not give legal advice. All information, content, materials available on this presentation are for general information purposes only. And the information presented may not constitute the most up to date. So for example, legislation may get updated since I've made this presentation. And the Zoom meeting may contain third-party links. I'm just using these as examples and I'm not asking you to go on them. So the limited company process. So this is essentially a status correction process that takes us out of the system that is known as the United Kingdom Limited to become a free man or woman that's no longer an implied corporation. So we all know they use the implied corporation to come at us, and how do you get remedy for that? So the reason we choose this process is the limited company puts us back into the private. We're no longer under the control of these corrupt elites, as I call them, or under their jurisdiction, as we control the title deeds to that company. It's no longer implied, so we have full ownership of it. So this takes approximately 10 minutes to complete if you want to register your own limited company. Costs about £12. It's advised not to pay third parties to do this, as it has caused complications in the past. It's very easy to do, and I would not pay anyone £150 to do it if it costs you 12. There's also a cost for a trademark. Now the trademarks are a little bit expensive. They're about £270 for the series. The reason I say get a series is you own every variant of the name. And the great thing about this is when you get the series, when you renew it in 10 years time, you only pay for the one, so it's actually cheaper. But if you add to the series, it's more expensive, a lot more expensive. So it's better to fork out an extra 40 quid at the beginning than pay hundreds, possibly thousands more if you want to expand on it later. So I'm just giving you an estimate of costs that you would probably have to pay when doing this process. So why do corporations have no capacity for a mandate powers over authority? So if you look at Shroud's judicial dictionary, it says the power to examine a debtor as to what the debts were due to him did not extend to a corporation, to which obviously an oath could not be administered. That's very interesting. It shows a complete jurisdiction boundary where they can't come after you. So let's take a look at contract law and the actual name and the person that's used. So when we're born, we're given a name and we attach ourselves to this name. But the fun fact is we don't actually own the name. So how many of you can actually hear say you own your name? And the sad reality is it was simply given to us. The system then proceeds to build an attachment every year. You have your birthday, for an example, and what's your name whenever you sign up to something. And it's like this indoctrination, brainwashing, where it tries to create this joinder with you, you know? And the reason they do this is to extort money from us and to keep us poor. And the only way anyone can have authority over you is when you claim to be the legal name without owning it. So if we take a look at Black's Law for a minute, Black's Law Dictionary defines the legal name as a Christian name and a surname put together. Now this is very interesting because you can't just have a first name like the old days. And after 1969, the birth certificate, they started adding the surname. It was never there prior to that. And that is why they always write to you with the Christian name, the first name and the surname. It's never just your first name. And the reason they do this, it's quite simple. In their legalese system, they can't write to you as your first name only. They need to write to you with your first name and your surname because that's the legal name. And that's how they get the joinder. So even if it's uppercase and lowercase, it's still a legal name. And that's why with the trademark, I recommend you get the series where you have the all lowercase, the upper lowercase, and the all uppercase. And that way you control every variant of the name in the legalese side. And when you register it through the corporation, you get the title deed for that name. There can never be another name registered as a corporation with that name. You own it and have the limited liability at the end, depending on the type of corporation you register. So it's not until you agree and give consent to that legal name that they can then have a contract with that legal name and write to the whole name in uppercase. So what I mean by this is when you're, for example, getting a credit card or they're offering you a credit card, they may write to you at the beginning with an upper lowercase, so a capital D for Doe or something like that, you know? And then once you accept that contract for the credit card, did you ever notice the name is all of a sudden all uppercase? And it's the same with all your bank cards, your credit cards, your driver's license, anything like this. They all create this implied company that they expect you not to own, and they have full authority over, and you accept full liability and responsibility for. So it's very, very sneaky what they're doing. So this is basically what I was saying. Have you ever noticed in the beginning, they write you the legal name is in upper and lowercase? This is because they're offering you a contract. And it's that simple, because as soon as you agree to the offer or go to deal with it, then they send you another letter in the all capital name. And this is because now there's a contract in play that you have unknowingly agreed to because they wrote to you in the legal name in the first place and you accepted it. So let's break down what they just did. At the beginning, they wrote to an implied company that you most likely didn't own and had no control over, yet you just accept full liability and responsibility for it. Now let that sink in. Imagine accepting full liability and responsibility for something you have no power over. And they didn't write to John, they wrote to John Doe, for example, or John Doe, all capitals. And you believe that because you attach yourself to the name, that's you. So you need to really deprogram yourself from this and detach yourself from the name. You can call yourself anything you want. But the reason they give you these documents is to condition you, to say, this is you, accept, accept, accept. And it's an indoctrination that's implied to you from the first day you step into school. What is your name every morning? Are you here? And it's just drilled into you. So moving on, what happens when you create a limited company in your certified copy of an entry name? Now, a lot of people call the certified copy of an entry a birth certificate. It's not. It's actually called a certified copy of an entry. So once the name John Doe is incorporated as John Doe Limited, the director of that company, which is written John and Doe, do you notice the all capitals for the surname, can contract with other companies, right? The reason they're giving the director an all capital surname is because he has to be held liable. And how do they come after you with commerce? Well, only a company can sue another company, right? So by them putting the all capitals surname, they're making you be able to be liable. So if the director of another company didn't contract with John Doe Limited, well, it's quite simple. There is no contract. You own the title deed to that company. You could simply ask them, you know, do any contracts exist? Obviously, you know they don't, right? But there is no contract because how could there be? If you registered your company and it's dormant, for example, there is no contract. You know this because you haven't signed any contract. So how could there possibly be a contract? And then we have, so always ensure to deal with other companies with notices and not by phone or by email. Oh, sorry, did I skip a slide? No, forget, apologies. So if you're being pursued, for example, by a billing company for an alleged payment, and I call them alleged payments because the way they write them is very sneaky. So what I do is I simply go into Companies House or the government search for corporations, and I find out the name director of the company that's pursuing you. Now, if you normally go to the bottom of a web page for these debt collectors, whatever, they have a registered company name. And a lot of the time it's different to the actual website name or the letter they're writing to you on. But you can easily search that and you can easily get their directors' names, the address, and you can look at their company accounts and see how much money they have. And then what I do is I proceed to write a notice. to the director. You never write a letter, you never phone them or anything like that, because they're useless. You have to give them notice. So you write a notice to the director from your limited company, asking for any existing contracts that they hold with your company, that they're required for your company filing. And remember that the director runs the company and has full responsibility and also liability for the company. And then you ask them to provide a proof of claim in the form of a contract between your company and theirs. Now, if no contract exists, how can there be a proof of claim? So you normally give them about 14 days to do this. And remember, this is a business-to-business relationship. You don't write any of this living man, flesh, blood type of thing. It's simply, you know, I noticed I got this letter from your company. You're saying I owe this alleged debt. Can you, I've just become a director of this company. Can you please forward all your company filings and contracts with your company and mine? They're required for company filing, and leave it as simple as that. You know, most likely they're going to come back to you and say, no contract exists. And there you go. Someone have a question? No. So then we have the limited company puts us in the private, but it also puts a minefield around us. And this is very important. So we're no longer under their jurisdiction, but in the private. And nobody has the authority over the legal name anymore, but yourself as the owner. So you may still hold a passport, a driver's license, but you're in control of them as the director. So what I've done with my driver's license, I still need it because I do commerce with my company. But what I've done is I've removed the title. I don't use a Mr. title or whatever, because the title is not part of your name. But what they've done now is they have the trademark of my company on the driver's license as the name in all capitals. So whenever I get a ticket or I ever get written to by whatever, they have to breach the trademark of a different entity, my company, and they're using that entity's property for financial and commercial gain. Nothing to do with the person they wrote to. It's another entity writing to them. Just become aware that you're using our property for financial and commercial gain. Cease and desist. They drop it so quickly because they're liable. They've stolen another entity's property. They're trading it without permission. They know no contract exists, and they drop it. It's the same when you get a speeding ticket or whatever, and the police pulls you over. You know, you say, this is a trademark name. The second he writes it down, you can issue him an invoice. I have an invoice book in my car. Because as the director, you need to protect your company and your company assets. And if someone is stealing your company assets, you have due diligence to move and take action against them in a responsible way, of course.
Tegan?
Yeah.
Tegan?
Yeah.
Tegan, can you hear me? Sorry to interrupt me. We lost bandwidth for a second, so I had to quickly log out and log back in.
Oh, okay. Where did I lose you?
Would you be able to go back a couple of slides and I'll...
Where did I lose you? Do you remember?
Yeah, about here. It was notices.
Notices. This one.
Yeah, when you notice the director.
Yeah, you're still cutting in and out a bit. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sorry about that.
No, it's just sorry. This happened.
Yeah,
oh, can you still hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. So what I'm saying is always ensure you deal with other companies with notices. So what I mean by this is you never phone them, you never write them letters, and you never email them. So if you're being pursued by a billing company for an alleged debt or a debt collector or whatever, you know, British Gas or whoever, just as an example, what I do is I simply go on the Companies House website or the government directory website where you can search companies, and I find the name of the director that's pursuing you. Now, how I do this is I go on, for example, if it's British Gas, you go to the bottom of their webpage. It has their company registration number. And from there, you can search that and bring up their company name. And normally the company name that they give you on these notices and everything is different than their registered company name. So that's one fact, they've been deceiving you. And this will also give you the information of who the directors are, so who's liable. You can get their address, so you know where to write the notices to. And you can see their company filings at the end of the year, so you know how much money they're making. So you proceed to write a notice to the director as a director of your limited company. So what you're doing is you're asking them for any existing contracts they hold with your company that they are required for your company filing. And just remember that the director that runs the company has full responsibility and liability. And ask them to provide a proof of claim in the form of a contract between your company and their company. You guys still here?
Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Just checking. So the limited company essentially puts us in the private, but with an added benefit of putting a minefield around us. So we are no longer under their jurisdiction. We're back in the private instead of the public. And then nobody has the authority over the legal fiction anymore except you, because you have the title deed when you register the company. And then no one else can have that name because you own the all caps name with the limited at the end. Anyone who tries to register a corporation in that name will have it rejected immediately. And this may mean you may still hold a passport, you can still hold a driver's license, but you're in control of them as you own the title deed from the company registration and then the trademark, one of the highest forms of legal documents on the legalese side. So what I was saying before I got cut off is, for example, when I get a speeding ticket or whatever, what I did with my driver's license is I removed the Mr., the title part of the license. You can do that online. It costs about £12 because I have to issue a new license. But then what they're using is they're trading the company trademark. Now, the company is a completely different entity. So what happens here is when they issue you a fine, it's commerce, right? They're engaging in trade, but what they're using for that trade is your company's property. And as a director, you have an obligation to protect the company and ensure the company is doing okay. So if someone is stealing company property, you need to intervene, right? So when they're stealing company property for financial and commercial gain, you have to tell them to cease and desist. And a lot of the time they do. And there's no way they can say they didn't know once a trademark is registered because it goes in the Gazette and they have a 2-month opposition period where anyone can say they reject your application or oppose it, X, Y, and Z. So they can't say they didn't know. And it's also publicly searchable. But also, what you're doing here is it's a completely different entity, what they're writing to. And this is what really confuses them. A lot of the grunts don't understand this. Only the directors or the higher ups will. But you have an entity, which is a name. You can own a name and it has nothing to do with you. You can buy someone else's name, but it just means you're the owner of that name. It's a property. It's just like intangible. It's like a phone or a car, or, you know, it's just property. So that's, for example, Nike or McDonald's. It's a name, it's a brand. And that's what they're doing here. And if you, for example, tried to open a Coca-Cola or American Express or Nike or McDonald's, you would have serious legal implications against you, wouldn't you? They would come after you, everything they had to stop you. Because one of the 10 rules of commerce is you do not interfere with commerce. And that's what happens when they're doing this and stealing your property. They're interfering with commerce. So if we take a look at the limited company, one of the ways an individual can take authority over the legal name is by registering the legal company. And what happens then is you get a legal title deed for that name. So when the individual buys their limited company in a certified copy of an entry name, they receive the title deed, they become the owner of the name in law, and nobody can contract with that company because it's new and it's dormant. So when you're registering it, it asks, what's the company going to be doing? You search dormant and it gives you like 99999 SIC code, it's called. So the way to think of this is in the strawman aspect is the company is your vessel, right? And what you're doing is you're bringing your vessel into the dock. It's out at sea at the moment. You don't own it. It's just roaming there randomly. But the second you buy the name in the limited company, you own the vessel, right? You bring it back in and you just dock it and you're not using it, you know, but it's there and you have full ownership of it. You're taking back full control. So if we look at a person's legal name, your legal name is the name you're generally called and known by. So for example, Lord Justice Omrod in case DVB, the Court of Appeal held that it is common ground that the surname in common law is simply the name by which the person is generally known. So generally speaking, the name of your official documents and records, for example, work, school records, doctor records, national insurance and tax records, bank account, driving license, will be held in your legal name. The important thing is your name is your call by and what you're known by. They're two different things. So you can choose your name, but what they're doing is, as I said before, indoctrinating you, accept. So for example, you can be known by more than one name. Sometimes it isn't clear that someone's legal name is because they're known by more than one name on different documents. And you have this where sometimes your parents did a deed poll when you were younger, but that differs from your actual certified copy of an entry name. And a deed poll isn't actually changing the name. You have to do an enrolled deed poll for it to be legally binding. So just be aware of that as well. So if we start looking at titles, and this I found very interesting. So officially recognized British titles are considered part of the legal name in the United Kingdom, right? The corporation. So this includes all members of the House of Lords, which is a corporation. So that includes archbishops and bishops, their wives and families, baronets, holders, knighthood, and their wives, and baronesses and the holders of the damehoods, right? So husbands of the dames of the realm do not have titles. This is, of course, is not fair, but the whole system is unfair, as they say. But other titles, so titles which are not considered part of your name. And what's the very first thing they call it? Social titles. And they have under that Mr., Mrs., Miss, MX, Master. Very interesting, right? They always force you, are you Mr. X, Y, and Z? Are you Mrs. John Doe? Are you whatever? They never just call you by the name. They always add the title. So this puts you under their jurisdiction, because under Lex Mercatoria, the law of the sea, when they're doing commerce, the master of the ship, the commander, is in charge of everyone. So no matter what you say, he doesn't have to listen. And once you give that jurisdiction to them by saying, it's like when a police officer stops you and asks, do you understand me? Do you stand underneath them? It's the same as what they're doing here. Are you Mr. X, Y, and Z? You're saying, I have no authority. I'm basically a slave. But the interesting thing about this is once you say you own the limited company, it tops them all. So the limited company, for example, when you go into court as the owner of the limited company, you go in as the same level as a judge. So you never say, I'm Mr. X, Y, and Z. You go, I'm Mr. of the family. I'm the owner of this company. How can I help you? And that's the difference. And here I just want to explain there's a difference between the legal and the lawful. So what do I mean by this? So we must capture the trademark, right? And the trademark is so important in this process, and it has to be owned by your dormant limited company. And the reason I say it has to be owned by the dormant limited company is because it's a totally different entity to what they're writing to. And if for those of you who don't know what a trademark is one of the highest forms of legal documents someone can get. So by owning a trademark of your name or the company name, the name becomes the property of that company, which is a separate entity than what they're writing to. So you now have a legal registered trademark of the name that is owned by your limited company. So what does it mean and how can it help you? So quite simply put, no other company can use your company property without your permission, and the trademark is your company property. Just like Nike is the brand, right? That's the same, it's their company property. So how does this benefit you? So say a debt collecting agency sends a bill to your trademark name, which is your company property. This is essentially the debt collecting agency doing commerce for financial and commercial gain with your company property without your explicit authorization. Or in another word, we call it fraud. What is a trademark infringement? So a trademark is infringed when another person or business uses a registered trademark without the permission to do so. And the trademark infringements may include using the mark as a registered trademark on the same type of goods or similar goods. So when you're registering a trademark, you have something called goods and classes. And what you can do here is add everything that fits your description. So if it's legal, mortgage, finance, debt collection, all these types of things, you can add them to it. All these classes. Now, the more classes you add, the more expensive it will get, obviously. But depending on what you want to protect against, it's worth it in some cases. If you invest £500 over 10 years, it's not a lot of money, you know, and it gets cheaper on the renewal. But the protection it gives you is insane. So you're using also an infringement is a similar name, product design, packaging design, or logo as already established. So when they write the name on windowed envelope, they're using your company property as a logo. And that's how you have to see it. So they're using the property and then they're attaching an invoice for a fee for the use of it. So basically it's fraud. Your company logo is being used to capture money for them. So there is something I wanted to point out, because I've noticed a lot on my Telegram group. When people register the trademark, they get a lot of these postal scams. Recently, we were discussing it on the group, and I wanted to go through it here as well. So after the registration, it's quite common to get scam letters, either pretending to be from the Intellectual Property Office, the IPO, or other third-party companies offering monitoring capabilities. And from my experience, all these are scams, and a lot of them are coming from Eastern Europe, even though they have companies registered in England. So for example, recently someone got the trademark owner letter on the right for £869, saying they're offering monitoring capabilities. And they even say at the bottom, this is not an invoice, but a request without obligation to pay. That's the most stupidest thing ever, but they still got confused and nearly paid it. And then once you go to their website, so we see here their name is worldwide trademarks.co.uk. Well, that's the email address they're using. So if they can have an email address like that, it means they have a domain name like that. So when I go to the domain name, I find the actual company. It doesn't appear on Google, but I can find it through their ownership of the domain name. And it brings me to this real-time monitoring company website. And it looks pretty real, pretty interesting. I was like, whoa, they put a lot of effort into this, you know? Upon more investigation, I don't think you can read this here, but in the bottom left, there's no company information or company registered number. I said, that's very strange, you know? So I started looking at the envelope, and the envelope is saying it's coming from Budapest, Hungary. And I said, well, that can't be right. They're giving an English address here and the contact information in the top left. So when I started looking at what company is registered actually at this address, I found it's a totally different name company. It's called Angel Trademark Services International Limited, and the address matched. And here I could see the director's name. It was Anita Marr. And then here I could see, okay, the amounts were similar. This is her company accounts. This is how much she had in it. And I could just see, well, she's saying she had the company for years, but she's only just registered a domain name in January 26th. And when was this letter sent before? I think it was January 23rd or something. I didn't capture it on that. But, you know, 3 days after they sent the letter, they captured the registered domain name, which I found interesting. Now, they went to a lot of effort on this website to cover things up, and it looked extremely professional. But I just want you to be aware that there are these scams out there, and you don't need them. Because when you register a trademark, the information you put on it will be public. So also, I want to point out, if you're registering a limited company, I use something called a ghost mail address. Now, they offer three types of services. One, you can have just the registered company address. You can have also the registered director's address if you don't want people having your home address. And then they offer another thing where any mail for the company is they scan it and they forward it to you by a digital copy. You never have the originals. It's only digital. So just be aware of that. But it helps because when you register a company, all that information and director information is public. So you can use ghost mail addresses to hide where you are, you know. So the debt collectors would never actually come to your house, for example. They go to these company houses or whatever, you know, these ghost mail addresses. So that's probably another thing to think about when registering a company. And I have all this information on my Telegram group, a step-by-step guide on how to do all this as well. So you have trademarks we've talked about, but we also have something called copyright. And a lot of people I've noticed have confused the two. So the difference is copyright protects your work and stops others from using it without your permission. You get copyright protection automatically. You don't have to apply for it or pay a fee. It's completely free. And this isn't a register of copyright works in the UK. So you never, ever have to register your copyright. It's just automatic, no matter what anybody says. So you automatically get copyright protection when you create original literacy. So that could include your emails that you're writing, your text messages, everything like that, right? Dramatic, musical, artistic work, including illustration and photography, original non-literary written work, your notices, or computer code, such as software, web content and databases, sounds and music recordings, so the recordings of your voice, for example, film and television recordings, broadcasts, the layout of published editions of written, dramatic, and musical works. And you can mark your work with a copyright symbol. You don't have to, but you can. your name, and year of creation, right? So whether you mark the work or not, it doesn't affect the level of protection you have. You always have protection. So how I explain this to people is, during your life on this realm, you're writing a book, and that book is your life. Every day you're doing something, and you're capturing evidence for that book, right? So when someone steals that information and uses it without your permission, that's a violation of your copyright, because you haven't published your book yet. It's in the works, you know, that's your life's work. And normally that only happens when you leave this realm, where people remember you on everything you've done, you know, and that's normally when your book and all your work start to get recognized. So that's how I normally look at copyright, as different from a trademark. So what's the benefits of copyright, and what does it prevent people doing? So it prevents them from copying your work. So say you send a notice and they send it on to someone else, an onward chain. Well, that's a violation of your copyright, right? Especially if you put strictly private and confidential on the notice. Distributing copies of it, whether free of charge or for sale. Renting or lending copies of your work. Performing or showing, playing your work in public. Making an adaptation of your work. Putting it on the internet, or copying it overseas. Yes, for example, there's something called the Berne Convention, and most countries have signed on to this, where your work is actually protected overseas. So not every country has, but a lot of countries have, through international agreements, signed the Berne Convention. So in most countries, copyright lasts a minimum of plus 50 years for written work, dramatic and artistic works, and at least 25 years for photographs and other types of work. So there's always confusion there, and we're happy to talk about it towards the end if needed. So we talked about the limited company, and we all know about the men of straw, but this is a snippet from Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. And I got it from, so men of straw, men who used in former days to ply about courts of law, so called from the manner of making known their their occupation, i.e. by straw in one of their shoes, recognized by the name of straw shoes. An advocate or a lawyer, this is interesting, who wanted a convenient witness knew by these signs where to meet with one. And the colloquy between the parties was brief. Don't you remember, said the advocate, to which the ready answer was, to be sure I do. Then come into court and swear it. So essentially they're saying they're lying about stuff, and that this is where the whole straw man comes. You're essentially dead when you go into court. That's why it's called a summons. They're summoning the ghost, and that's why they call it a hearing when you go in, because you can hear everything, but only your representative can speak for you because they've summoned the ghost. And that's essentially what they're doing. So if we look at Black's Law, what is a corporation? And this is an interesting one. A corporation is an artificial person or legal entity. Now, artificial person or legal entity, very interesting words, created by or under the authority of the laws of the state or a nation, composed in some rare instances of a single person and his successors, being the incumbents of a particular office. Well, that's interesting wording, incumbents of a particular office. So it sounds like a company, right? But ordinarily consisting of an association of numerous individuals who subsist as a body political under a special denomination, right? So what they're saying here is basically the government is a corporation. You have your House of Lords, you have, which could be the directors, you know, you have different departments in the corporation. You have your HR department, you have people for your health, you have security, which could be the police or the army, you know, it's all set up like a corporation. And if you look at the UN as the holding company, and then you look at each country as like a subsidiary company of that holding company, this is just an example for you. So each country would be a subsidiary of the holding company, which have their own HR, their own parliament, which is also another corporation, but like for directors that run the company. And the same with the presidents, prime ministers, etc., etc. They have to protect the corporation, and they have to do everything possible to protect the corporation. So a corporate legal individual. Municipal corporation possesses two kinds of power, governmental and public. Well, what's the difference here? So I'm proprietary and private. And in exercise of form, a corporation is municipal government, while as the latter is a corporate legal individual. And you also have corporate name. So when a name when a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, or supposing none to be actually given, will attach it by implication. That's where they get the implied company. So when you register it, you own it. And by the name alone, it must sue and be sued, and to do all legal acts through a very minute variation therein is not material, and the name is capable of being changed by competent authority without affecting the identity or capacity of the corporation. So this means you can also change the name as you go along. This is just classification. So you have your public and private, for example. So according to the accepted definitions and rules of corporations are classified as follows. You have a public corporation and you have a private corporation. So a public corporation is one created by the state for political purposes and to act as an agency in the administration of civil government, generally within the particular territory or subdivision of the state, and usually invested in for that purpose, with subordinate and local powers of legislation as a keyword there, such as a county, city, town, or school district. These are also sometimes called political corporations. And private corporations are those founded by and composed of private individuals for private purposes. Sorry, I cut off the last word there. So that means what they've done now is they have tricked us to having everything in the public. You put it on Facebook, you broadcast everything, your date of birth, your email address, your phone numbers, where you're going, everything you do, people are broadcasting it in the public when we should be in the private. And what happens is if you try to get a judge's name, a court clerk's name, a government minister's address or anything like that, they don't give it to you because they're in the private when they should be in the public. You can see it there. Public corporations, one created for the state for political purposes. Well, there you go. They should be giving you all the information, but they don't. So they've reversed the roles of private and public. And that's very dangerous. So we need to take back the private. Another quote from Black's Law Dictionary. So as a person, so a man considered according to the rank he holds in society, with all those rights to which the place he holds entitles him, and the duties which it imposes. So a human being is considered capable of having rights and of being charged with duties, while a thing is an object over which rights may be exercised. Well, they also have an artificial person. An artificial person such as are created and devised by law for the purposes of society and government, called corporations or bodies political. And natural persons, such as formed by nature and distinguished from artificial persons or corporations, and then private person, an individual who is not the incumbent of an office. So you own your own company and have claimed your company name. But you see how they mix up everything towards us and confuse us. It's quite interesting. So whenever you get a letter that's not directed to your limited company, when you get it, like you have to be smart here and choose which letters you want to open and not open. But for example, if you know it's a debt collector or something, you don't have to open it if it's not directed to the limited company properly. And there's something called dead letters. And dead letters, which the postal department has not been able to deliver, goes back to this department where they're basically opening all the letters and they've tried to return them. And if they can't, they just put them in this warehouse and they store them there for X amount of time until they're destroyed. So dead letters are where letters essentially go to die if they can't be returned. You have law Latin. I don't know if you've ever seen this, writing in Latin. Latin is always in all capitals. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. And they call it law Latin. So the corrupt form of Latin language employed in the Old English law books and proceedings. And then, interestingly enough, we had in person the definition of society. So, and I also pulled this up here. So society is an association or a company of persons, generally not incorporated unit. Very interesting. So when they're using that word a lot now, society, for the greater good of society and stuff like that. So what they're essentially talking about is the greater good of the corporation, nothing to do with us. I also got legal names. So under common law consists of one Christian name and one surname, and the insertion, omission, or mistake in the middle name. So that's how they contracted to with the legal name. You have dog Latin, the definition of that. So the Latin of illiterate persons, Latin words put together on the English grammatical system. So you don't actually understand what they're writing. You think just because you can read the words in all caps or whatever, you understand it. Yet a lot of the times when you go into court, they're using something called Chicago Manuals of Style version 6. So they're using sign language. And if you look up the definitions of the words in sign language, it's not how you would actually talk to someone. For example, stop or car or something like that. How do you describe that in sign language? It has a very different meaning to the actual English language. And then I wanted to discuss the word foundling. I don't know if you ever knew this, but all hospitals that are there for birth are called foundling hospitals. And the term foundling is a deserted or exposed infant, a child found without a parent. So when your children are born and they registered a certified copy of an entry in this foundling hospital, they consider the child to be deserted and without a parent. And this is just, when you look at the wordings that they're using in their corporations and stuff, it's extremely, extremely freaky. And then we have a man. So a man is a human being, a person of a male sex, a male of the human species above the age of puberty, right? And you also have it in federal law, a vassal, a tenant, or a fiduciary, right? The Anglo-Saxon relation to a lord and a man was originally purely a personal and founded on mutual contract. And then you have a man of straw, which I showed you before. But the interesting thing of humans and species, so if you ever look up the word species in Black's Law, it's actually stock, like an inventory in a warehouse. And same with race. So when they say human race, that's actually a stock, an inventory in a warehouse. And humans can have monsters which have no rights. So the way they trick the wording to confuse us, to accept all this, you are a human being, you know? It's very, very interesting. You also have something called a legal title. So when I say you get the trademark and the company registration, you have something called legal title. And this is one cognizable or enforceable in a court of law, or one which is complete and perfect so far as it regards the apparent right of ownership and possession. So you're saying you own it. And that's why when most people go into court, they don't actually own the name. That's what I said earlier. You're taking responsibility and liability for something you don't own. So this is where they get very confused when you go in with your limited company and stuff. And what I did before was I filed it under the miscellaneous ones. And then when you actually go in and you say you're the owner and you say, look, it's been in court possession the entire time. If they were looking for X, Y, and Z as a corporation, they never specified who in the corporation they were looking for. And another word, corporation de facto. So one existing under color of law and in pursuance of an effort made in good faith to organize a corporation under the statute, an association of men claiming to be legally incorporated company. Legally incorporated company. So an association of men claiming to be incorporated company. That's interesting wording. It just proves this limited process even more. And then corporation, basically an artificial person or legal entity created by or under the authority of the laws of state or a nation. That's basically what the corporation is. Corporate legal individual and corporate names. So basically the municipal corporation possesses two kinds of power: government, governmental and public, and proprietary and private. We always want to be in the private. And then you have the corporate name. So when a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, and supposing to none actually given. So this is where we were saying earlier that essentially a lot of people need to claim this name, or you have just no say or no authority over anything. This is why it never works, any of these remedies, when they say, well, no, I will say never works, but very, very rarely works, the remedies, because you have no say or authority in the legal system under them if you don't own the title, the legal title. And then, are we all still here?
Tegan, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, jackpot. Ready to go, mate.
Okay, brilliant.
Was it this one, or it was the one after where you told us about foundling in hospitals? It was the one after that.
Yeah, so a man. Yeah. No problem.
Oh.
So going back, so Black's Law Dictionary of a man. So a man is a human being, a person of a male sex, a male of the human species above the age of puberty. And in feudal law, so a vassal, a tenant, or a fiduciary. So the Anglo-Saxon relation to a lord and a man was originally purely personal and founded on a mutual contract. And then you also had the men of straw, which I discussed already. But the term species is very interesting there. So if you look up race and species in Black's law, it means stock or inventory in a warehouse. So they're actually saying human species, and humans have monsters which have no rights. So it's very creepy when you look at the wording that they use. We still here?
Yes, mate.
Brilliant. So then we have a legal title. So one of these is what I was saying you get when you essentially get the limited company name. So you have your legal title, and then when you get the trademark, you also get a registered trademark title. So one of these is basically a cognizable or enforceable in a court of law, or one which is complete and perfect so far in regards to the apparent right of ownership and possession. So what I was saying is the reason why a lot of the remedies don't work or don't have the desired outcome is because you have no ownership of title that you're claiming when you do the remedy. But if you have the ownership and the title deeds to show that, what can they do? And then we have corporation de facto. So one existing under the color of law and in pursuance of an effort made in good faith in good faith to organize a corporation under a statute. And then they have an association of men claiming to be a legally incorporated company. And there you go. That basically says it there. They are a company. And then it just had the definition of corporation, an artificial person or legal entity that's created by, under the authority of laws and statutes of a nation. Are we still here? You still there?
Yes, can hear you, mate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, just double checking. So what we have here is a corporate legal individual. Now the keyword there is individuals. So that could be a municipal corporate, possesses two kinds of power, and governmental and public, and proprietary and private. So we always want to be in the private. So when we register our limited company, we are in the private. We're no longer in the public. And then you have the corporate name. So when a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, or supposing none to be actually given, will attach to it by implication. And this is how they get you with the implied corporation versus when you own it versus the title deed. And now we have corporation de facto. So this is essentially one existing under the color of law and in pursuance of an effort made in good faith to organize a corporation under the statute and association of men claiming to be legally incorporated company and exercising their powers and functions of a corporation. We still there? Brilliant. So, and then I wanted to talk about the Fraud Act and how to get some type of remedy with these individuals. So this is the Fraud Act as of yesterday, the 3rd of June 2023. So it's subject to change, but basically it gives the definition of fraud. So a person is guilty of fraud if he is in breach of any of the sections listed in the subsection 2, which provide different ways of committing offense. So the sections are fraud by false representation, fraud by failing to disclose information. So I heard someone earlier talking about DSAR and them not responding to it. Well, that's fraud. And then you had fraud by abuse of position. And then you have section 3, which is interesting. A person who is guilty of fraud is liable on a summary conviction to an imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months or a fine exceeding the statutory maximum, or both. On a conviction or on an indictment, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years. So they can go to jail for up to 10 years, these local councillors or whatever, you know. So if we look at fraud by false representation, so when you own your company name, you own the trademark, and then someone says, you owe us money, right? What they've done is they've taken your property and issued an invoice in it, which could be considered a fraud by false representation. So a person is in breach of this if he dishonestly makes a false representation, hence the invoice to you or the bill, intends by making the representation to make gain for himself or another, the money, the commerce, to cause loss to another or to expose another to risks. So basically, he has financial and commercial gain for his company and himself, and is to the detriment of your company. It's a totally different entity, your company, than you. But what they're doing is they're damaging your company. Your company could have had these contracts to make money, And what they've done is they've stolen your company property to make financial and commercial gain for themselves to the detriment of your company. So a representation is false if it's untrue or misleading, and the person making it knows that it is, or might be, or untrue or misleading. So even if it might be untrue, it could be fraud. And then they go on to define representation means any representation as a fact of law, including a representation as to a state of mind. And this is very interesting, as it says the person making the representation or any other person in charge. And here's the key word: a representation may be expressed or implied. And this is where they get you with the implied company. You've taken liability and responsibility for an implied company. So they even mention it in the law if you look at the key words. Are we still here? Brilliant. So then what we have is a person is failing to disclose information. So if you have a DSAR, GDPR, Freedom of Information request, a person for fraud, a person is in breach of this section if he dishonestly fails to disclose to another person information which is he is under a legal duty to disclose, and intends by failing to disclose the information to make gain for himself or another. So how you could interpret that is if they're not disclosing it and they know there's an issue, or they know there's a potential lawsuit, or they did something wrong, they're making a gain by not releasing it to you. They're trying to protect themselves. That's fraud. And what they're doing by that is section 2, to cause loss to another or to expose another to a risk of loss. You do not know the information, so it's the risk of loss. Or if they are hiding something, it's causing loss to you because you can't seek remedy. And then for all those directors out there, and all these counselors and lawyers and judges and court clerks and whatever, fraud by abuse of position. So this is a very interesting one. A person is in breach of this section if he occupies a position in which he is expected to safeguard or not act against the financial interests of another person. Now remember, a person is also a corporation. Dishonestly abuses that position and intends by means of abuse of that position to make gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or to expose another to risk or loss. Hence your trademark violations, your all this type of stuff, right? So a person may be regarded as having abused his position even though his conduct consisted of an omission rather than an act. So if they just didn't tell you something, or left out a key word or something like that, an email trail, or one page of a document, it's fraud by abuse of position. And this is so powerful. I use it all the time. So here they explain what gain and loss means. You've heard me talk about it a lot, but I just want you to see what it's like in the actual act. So gain or loss, extended only to gain or loss in money or other property. Now that's the key word there, other property, because your trademark is considered other property, right? Include any such gain or loss, whether temporary or permanent. And property means any property, whether real or personal, including things in action and other intangible property. So a trademark's intangible property. So gain includes a gain by keeping what one has done, as well as a gain by getting what one does not have. They're taking what you have, and they're taking money that you could have had. So that's what they're gaining there. And the loss includes a loss by not getting what one might get, and as well as a loss by parting with what one has. So if they stole your property, your phone, would you let someone just steal your phone on the street, and then you go make a complaint, or you send them an invoice, a cease and desist, return? They're like, oh, we have an internal policy, we'll get back to you with 30 days later. I'm sorry, I'm not bound by your internal policy. And if you say I am, that means I'm an employee and you have to pay me a salary and you owe me X amount of time backdated, so what is it? So whenever these corporations tell you, oh, we're just looking into it now, we have our own internal policies, remember, you're never bound by their internal policies. You have no contract with them. So you're not bound by that. That's only for internal employees. That's why they have company bylaws for the company policy. When you actually look at the words, but how they trick you is into thinking you're bound by that when you're not. That's for them. If they want to go do an internal review, so be it. Let them. Nothing to do with you. They still have to return your property or pay the invoice. this is a brilliant quote I found from the Hazard Circular in 1862. I think I said it on one of the last sovereign things when I was up there, but I just thought I'd say it again because it really hits the nail on the spot here. So slavery is likely to be abolished by the war power and chattel slavery destroyed.
Tegan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tegan?
Yeah. Did you lose me again? Just restart the recording. So I don't know where we got up to the last time, but I'll start over the Fraud Act again, because I think it's quite important when you go after these entities, I call them corporations or entities. So let's just get to the right window so I can see where I am. I'll probably start from the beginning with fraud. So fraud, the definition of fraud according to the Fraud Act as of today, 4th of June, 2023. So a person is guilty of fraud if he is in breach of any of the sections listed in section 2, or sorry, subsection 2, which provide different ways of committing the offense. So if we read subsection 2, we've got a list here. We've got fraud by false representation, fraud by failing to disclose information, and fraud by abuse of position. And then it goes on to section 3. So a person who is guilty of fraud is liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months or a fine not exceeding statutory maximum or both. And we have a section B to that as well, where a conviction on an indictment to an imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years or a fine or both. So they can go to jail for quite a long time for committing fraud. So if we go on to fraud by false representation. So a person, remember a person can be a corporation, is in breach of the section if he dishonestly makes a false representation and intends by making the representation to make gain for himself or another, or to cause loss to another, or to expose risk. So when a company falsely claims they own your property and is trading it, that's fraud by false representation. Now, the reason we use the limited company setup is because the way the system is designed is around corporations. It's not designed for us as living souls. It changed hundreds of years ago. As for the Lex Mercatoria, the law of the merchants, the law of the sea. So in order to protect our property for commerce, they have to be able to have strict laws for commerce and law and theft, all these types of things. So what happens here is you have to be able to protect your property. So fraud by false representation, when you separate the entity and look at it from a corporation perspective, a business to business relationship, when someone takes your company property, like you can't just walk into a pharmacy and take their produce, their stocks of inventory and sell them in your shop and then claim all that's yours, right? That's theft, that's criminal theft, or you can't just open up and say you're Amazon or American Express and say you have to pay me now, not American Express or Amazon, and all the money should go to you rather than them. That would be fraud by false representation. So that's what a lot of these companies are actually doing because they don't realize you own the implied name. So a representation is false if it's untrue or misleading. So if they make an untrue claim or it's misleading, the person making it knows that it is, or it might be. That's a key word there. It might be untrue or misleading. So it doesn't even have to be true. It just might be. And representation means any representation as a fact of law, including the representation as to a state of mind. So the person making the representation or any other person. So if his manager tells him something, they're liable. And section 4 is quite interesting here because they say a representation may be express or implied. And that's very interesting wording because they use the implied companies a lot to come after us, right? So it's even in this act. Now, if we go on to fraud by failing to disclose information, a person, which can also be a company, is in breach of this section if he dishonestly fails to disclose to another person, which also could be a company, information which he is under a legal duty to disclose, and intends by failing to disclose the information to make gain for himself or another, to cause loss to another, or to expose another to a loss of risk. So this comes under DSARs, data subject access requests, freedom of information access requests, and the GDPR, your general data privacy thing laws, right? So DSARs or GDPR, they're not allowed to charge you for them. I always ask them to organize them by date and in a digital copy that's readable format, like PDFs or whatever. Because if you don't, they're just going to send you all papers that are all jumbled up, X, Y, and Z. A lot of the time, you do have to provide an ID. You don't always, but some companies will request an ID. That's fine. You can say you're ordered to immediately delete this copy of this after verification, and you have to provide proof of deletion. You can get all that in writing from them as well. But it's very interesting this. So if they fail to disclose information to you, they are committing fraud. So if they fail to fully answer the DSAR, they haven't answered it. If you send a notice with a GDPR request, the DSAR, the freedom of information, whatever, and they fail to answer absolutely everything in it, they fail to answer the DSAR. They have to answer everything. And the law is clear on that. So we have fraud by abuse of position. So this says a person's in breach of the section if he occupies a position which is expected to safeguard or not act against the financial interests of another person. Dishonestly abuse that position and intended by means to abuse the position or to make gain for himself or another company, to cause loss to another company, or to expose the other to a risk of loss. And a person may be regarded as having abused his position, even though his conduct consisted of an omission rather than an act. So if they just didn't tell you something, they're already in breach. But I think this is quite clear. So it says that occupies the position in which is expected to safeguard and not act against the financial interests of another person. Well, that sounds very similar to the 10 laws of commerce, where you will not interfere with commerce, right? So when they're interfering with your company's ability to do commerce, well, here you go, it's fraud by abuse of position. So it is clear, it is in the legislation, and they can be held liable to it. It's very, very serious, And a lot of the time they're quite stupid and give you this stuff in writing without even realizing it, You may get these horrible threatening letters and notices from them, but you should be happy because they're actually incriminating themselves, and you can use that, Your notice dated XYZ has been kept on record as evidence, or a copy of it has. And these are the types of things you can say to them during your correspondence with them, And it also goes on to explain what gain and loss is. So I know I discussed quite a lot during the call, financial and commercial gain. And what exactly do I mean by that? So gain and loss extends to only the gain and loss in money or other property. Include any such gain or loss, whether temporary or permanent. And any property means any property, whether real or personal, including things in action and other intangible property. So a trademark is intangible property, right? So gain includes the gain by keeping it, what one has, as well as the gain by getting what one does not have. So it could be like stealing your property, right? And then loss includes a loss by not getting what one might get. So if they're charging money, they don't have a contract with your company and they're using your property for it, that's a loss to your company, right? And as well as a loss by parting with what one has. That would just be criminal theft, I'm assuming here. I'm not a legal advocate, don't consider anything I say as legal advice, but that's my understanding of what they're saying here. So the laws are quite clear once you have the jurisdiction. Now, I know a lot of people don't like registering stuff. They think you're giving the jurisdiction away. So what happens is you have Companies House under a different jurisdiction than HRMC, right? But in order to gain a foothold in their system with the minefield around you, see, you will have the ability to come in and out and dip into that system whenever you want. The way the current system works is you need to have a bank account, for example, to go buy something online. You can't use gold, right, or silver. You can't use a real asset, a real money type thing, because the current money we have, the fiat currency, is fake. It's a property owned by the Rothschilds, and there's a contract to use it. That's why you pay tax in every instance you use it. You pay tax on your income, you pay tax on your diesel, you pay tax on all your goods and services. That tax is for the use of their property. That's what people don't understand. We are setting the value of this piece of paper that's worth nothing. If you go onto your banknote, it says England, the Bank of England, that's a company. They have a company registration number. It goes, I promise to pay the bearer, because that's when it changed in the 1930s, where it was backed by gold. And then all of a sudden they stopped. So it became worthless. And that's because people were having a run at the banks at the time saying, you said you'll give me, or 20 pounds worth of silver, you'll give me 20 pounds worth of silver, please give it to me. And the banks didn't actually have that in reserve. They had overlent and they were all collapsing. And that's why they got rid of that standard. It was all fraud at the time. So that's essentially what's happened there. And by us using this system, I don't see it changing overnight, but we have to be able to dip in and out to get it, For example, I know mortgage, debt slave and stuff, but some of us have mortgages. We have certain things that we do want to buy and pay for, a holiday or whatever, where we have to use cards and stuff like that. And how do we maintain the security while inside their system? And that's why we use this limited company process, because it gives us all the protections and protects us from a lot of the liabilities. That's why it's called limited liability, the LTD, yeah? Limited liability company. And that's why we want to use that. We have all the protection where they have the onuses on them to prove the contract exists, while we can still dip in and out and use it however we want. That's what I was saying earlier. You can still have your passport, you can still have your driver's license. You know, you will have the ownership titles of that document when you go in. And that's what I meant by that. Are you still with me?
Still with you, buddy.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Just double checking. So the last time I was at the Sovereign group, I also discussed this hazard circular, and I believe it's very, very important to understand what these elite are doing to us and how far back they're thinking and planning ahead. So this is a quote from 1862. It was a book called Hazard Circular that was circulated around the elite bankers in America at the time when they were getting rid of slavery. And it quotes, "Slavery is likely to be abolished by the war power and chattel slavery destroyed. This I and my European friends are in favor of, for slavery is but the owning of labor and carries with it the care of the laborer, while the European plan led by England is capital and control of the labor by controlling the wages. And this can be done by controlling the money." So what they're saying there is, when they had slaves, they had to pay to take care of us, they had to feed us, they had to do everything, housing, you name it. When we got ill, they'd have to pay for the doctors. But what they've done now is they've brought in this fake fiat currency, yeah, that's worth nothing. We accept it as value for money when it's not. And then they tax the shit out of us, keep us poor, and constantly attack us. And we become these debt slaves, as we're known as. And look how far ahead they're planning. This is hundreds of years. Like, the average person cannot plan a week, 3 months, 6 months ahead. These elitists are planning 100, 200, 300 years ahead in time. So we don't see it. They're implementing these changes so subtly over time that we don't even know is happening. It's generation after generation, and slowly all our rights are gone. We have no control back. And that's what's so scary, is what they're doing. Nobody sees it until it's too late. And then we're in a system where we're back with the feudal system, where we got the serfs and the lords and the, you know, that's exactly what we're going back to now, where we have this two-tier system with slaves, and you have the elitist rich. So this is why this limited company process protects you so much, you know. Now, I get it, the problem people have with registering stuff, and you give the ownership away, but in order to dip in and out of the current system as is, you need to play their game. And you can exploit their game by what they're doing, by using what they're doing against you, against them, and then they can't fight back because they've already set all the precedents in court. And I'm happy to go on to questions now. If anyone wants to join the Telegram group or the Patreon group, they're the barcode links. The Telegram group is free. It has the step-by-step guide to the limited process on pinned to the top messages. And then the Patreon group, Carl has some fantastic videos. It's about $4.50 a month, I believe. And I would advise you to start with the Truth Serum videos, they're called. It explains everything in detail, and it is just mind-blowing. I'm happy to take any questions now if you have any.
Yeah, that was brilliant, mate. Thank you for that. Oh, you're not good. I'll jump in with a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. So you caught me actually talking about DSARs at the start, and
yeah.
You did mention we can of course use the DSAR process.
Yes.
I've had a bit of confusion about sort of potentially commingling jurisdictions, because I was thinking if I'm acting as a company, so it's like business to business transaction.
Yeah.
Does the DSAR still apply the same?
That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. You own both. You can do both. They can't. So you can say, yes, I'm in the personal capacity of whatever, but you still own the title deed. You can choose when to dip in and out of that corporation and apply the corporation to it. That's what I'm saying. When letters or whatever come in the post, you have to be an adult and be mature enough to say, I want to open this one or this one. I'm going to go through the limited company route, you know, because it may just be like a discount code or, you know, something like that. You don't want to upset someone over that, right? But that's the beauty of once you have that ownership within their system, you're using it against them, right? You choose what to use. So if they want to use a DSAR and you do in your personal capacity, fine. But as I said, they have to answer it 100% correct. And every question you asked, otherwise they haven't answered it in full and they're in breach. And for example, if you DSAR one company and then the debt collector has a different type of thing, and after you DSAR them, you know they've withheld information as fraud by false representation, fraud by failing to disclose. And then you get them on the fraud and you go after the directors, you report them to Crime Stoppers, you report them to the police, XYZ. You know, it's the same when they're harassing you, like, oh my God, 1 month, 2 or 3 months ago, I was getting, I think, 67 messages a month, something like 2 or 3 messages a day, emails, text messages, letters by a debt collecting agency from 3, you know. So what happened there was I had a contract with 3 Mobile. You know, they, in all fairness, their service didn't work. They breached their contractual terms. I had no internet for 4 months. I said, look, I've been paying for this and I have no internet. You breached your contractual terms. It hasn't been fixed, so I'm canceling, you know. They said to me, there'll be no cancellation fee. And then what they did was they charged me £1,000 cancellation fee and gave it straight to a debt collector. What that debt collector then did was use my trademark. And I was able to say, I'm the owner of this company, this trademark, please provide the contract. So you follow a step. They ignored it. They kept sending me text messages, emails, whatever. I kept documenting them. So I have an Excel spreadsheet on this time and this date, this was said with a little summary of what was going on, you know. And I built up this whole thing. And then, you know, after they ignored the first one, because I'd given them a fee schedule for continued use, I started invoicing them fees for the use of the property, because the company-to-company relationship, if they're continuing to use it, your company owns it. You can invoice them. So you do that. They're £300,000 in debt at the moment, and they continued harassing me. So I went to the police, and the police tried to say it's a civil dispute, they're not doing anything. And I go, actually, this is criminal theft because now it applies to my company trademark, intellectual property violations, yada, yada, yada. She still said she's not going to do anything. And I said, well, what's your badge number? Because I said, I've reported a crime to you now. They're causing distress. I've sent a cease and desist. They've continued harassing me after a cease and desist. You know, they've caused harm, trauma. I'm going to hold you personally liable if I get any more text calls, whatever. And by God, she called them the next day and I never heard anything since. But if they ever do bring something to me in court now, I have all the invoices where they're the debtor. The debtors lose 100% of the time. So if we go to court now and they say, oh, you owe £1,000, they owe me £300,000 just at debt collecting agency, which they'll have to clear. And I will go, well, you know, let's negotiate this. I'll deduct that £1,000 you claim I owe from what you owe me, and then you pay me the outstanding balance. They're never going to do that because the judge will be like, that's fair. And it's the same with 3. The 3 directors were put on notice for selling my property and trading it without a contract. So the trademark is a property, right? They sold it to a third party without my authorization to trade it, right? They're also liable. So the 3 directors are in for $500,000 each from me now as well, which I can enforce at any time I want. And I figured out how to do it on Dun & Bradstreet. So, you know, they get the credit agents used to report on us. I figured out how to do that back to them now.
That's really good. I would just also wanted to ask as well, if you're already in progress, say if I'm approaching the council and I'm approaching them as the man, as the sovereign.
Yeah.
Previous notices, but then I'm changing up my notices. I'm going to go in, say, do my DSAR as the limited company.
So you can only do DSARs as a personal individual, right? So that's what it stands for. Right. So same with GDPR, it's only for the personal. But what happens is, if the council is engaging in contracts with your property, hence the trademark name, right? And they're saying you owe X, Y, and Z on this date, and they put your trademark. So what happens is you'll get a letter in the post with an invoice, right? They'll have your trademark name on it. Well, that's a different entity. So you would say from your company, it's come to our company's attention that you're trading our company property. Can you please provide any contracts you have with our company, right? Of course, no contract exists. And then you say there's a fee for continued use. They're going to continue using and threatening. Eventually, when they see the bills start skyrocketing, they're going to quit. And they're going to start writing to the occupier, etc. These types of things, because they can't trade your name.